podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau, and I'm super excited, guys, because we are back with another one of our Ask an Expert series. If you're brand new to our show, this is a series that we launched a couple months ago where we invite you, our listeners, and community into the conversation. My team and I are always trying to think of interesting topics, relevant topics for you that you will find valuable and useful in your life, in your journey to live a more organized life. But sometimes we're not mind readers. And so I love when people email us and reach out and ask us questions. And so I decided, instead of just doing one off responses, let's bring this conversation to the table. And so we've had some wonderful guests asking all kinds of questions about organizing the Enneagram. I've had people ask me questions about how I started my business. So there's nothing that is hands off, right? Or like off topic. You can ask me pretty much anything. And the best part about it is, if you do have a question that's a little bit sensitive nature and you're just not comfortable coming on the air and discussing it, but you still would love it answered, we can do that too. We've had people write into us and want to remain anonymous, and we've changed names and just answered their question on air without having them on. So there's a million different ways for you to kind of join us as we continue to grow and build this community. But today we're in for a treat because we've got a great guest. She's absolutely adorable, and she has the most adorable name. Her name is Precious Berger, and Precious is coming to us from Fairfax, Virginia, and she has a question. I'm going to let her come out, introduce herself, and we're going to get going. So welcome, Precious, to the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
I am so grateful that you're here. Wait, I'm trying to just there you go. There, I see you now. I had to change my view. So tell our listeners a little bit about you and kind of what you do, and then we can lead into the question that you had.
Okay. So I taught elementary art for almost 30 years, and I retired last spring. So I have had a lot of transition in my life. I've been working some as a social media strategist, doing social media content and strategy, but in the last few months, I've really hunkered down and focused on my art, which has been my passion. As much as I love teaching, this is just up there as well. Like, I love art, all things art. I love to create, and I love to help others create. So I am now in a phase of focusing on my art, creating for others, and helping others learn their own creative spirit.
I love that. And I got to tell you, I'm a little bit envious because that is one area where I feel like my creative juices come out in other ways, but
Hmm.
to actually be able to create art. My mom was an art teacher
Oh,
back in the day before she had kids, and that's what she went to school for. And I feel like it's definitely skipped a generation because I did not get any of her classic artistic talent. So I'm the utmost admiration. But I loved your question. Could you mind if I just read it to everybody? We
absolutely.
can see if
Sure.
it. So the question that Precious wrote in, she said, I took my Enneagram. I did my Enneagram a few years ago, but I wasn't sure it was completely accurate. I would love to take it again and understand it better, especially to help me grow. Does the Enneagram change as you evolve? I've been in a state of transition in my life for the last few years. And what are some of the things that I should be considering during this transition? As an artist, I'd love to learn how the Enneagram can help me build my business and thrive as a professional artist. So, does that still ring true when you wrote that in to where we are now?
It absolutely does. The only difference is I did take the Enneagram again this week,
Okay.
and I can't remember what I was before, but
Okay.
I'm seven and I'm an adventurer, which kind of the description really fit in a lot of ways.
Okay.
The weaknesses were not mine though. That's the
Okay.
only thing that I noticed like I was like, those don't align with me at all. Because I'm definitely someone who's determined and works really hard and stays focused, and I'm very detail oriented, even though I'm like a big thinker.
Okay. Just taking notes.
No problem.
Um, all right. So I love talking about the Enneagram. And so, again, for anybody that's new, that is just joining or is listening and saying, I'm not really familiar with it, what the Enneagram is, it's a personality typology. And what separates the Enneagram from other different typologies is that it looks at your unconscious motivation. So it shows the best parts of you and the areas of growth, right? I don't want to call them the worst parts, but areas where we can grow. And really, in the work that I do, which looks at Enneagram and clutter and how people navigate it, but regardless, is we all have three different centers, right? Take even the Enneagram ease out of it, right? All the language. There's three centers that we use to make decisions and to do things: our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. And so there are 9 different Enneagram types. And then there's all these like subsets off of that. And each of the Enneagram types is dominant in one of those centers and weakest in one of those centers. So we have all of them, thoughts, feelings, and actions in each one of us, but we go through life intuitively using one of those without even thinking of it. And we probably don't use one as much. It's a little bit more dormant than the other two. And that impacts how we see the world. It impacts how we get things done. So specifically when it comes to like clutter, organization, building a business, all of the relationships are Enneagram type, and each one of them has their own specific nuances and characteristics. So a lot of the way that we test, if we take an assessment, isn't 100% accurate. And so I use it very loosely when people come to me and say, I want to figure out my Enneagram type. Mm-hmm. If people want to start with using a test, that's totally fine. I'm not going to say you can't. But just like any online assessment, there's going to be a large margin for error because there are all of these nuances. Sometimes we test or we answer questions based on where we are in a season of our life. So you, for example, just to use you're a teacher. So teacher, or by trade, well, you're an artist, but you teachers a lot are in a helping profession. So a lot of times you may be answering questions that you would be wearing your teacher hat, so to speak. Yeah. And so the responses might come across as you being a 2, which would be which is a helper, because again, some of the things that you do in your daily life represent that. And that's the beauty of the Enneagram, is that there's a little bit of all the types in each one of us, but where your true core number comes from, or your core type comes from your unconscious motivation, which is like, what is that inner voice telling me? What is that one rooted thing? So less about the behavior and really more about the motivation behind the behavior. So there's a lot of people that want to help people or do travel or do, are leaders or whatnot. But the reason behind it is really how we identify our Enneagram type. So, what I'm going to ask you is a couple of just questions, just kind of open-ended questions. So knowing that you said that you are kind of logical or like you do like, and you're detail oriented, which is great. And it's in some ways a little oxymoron, like paradoxical with a creative, because a lot of times creatives are kind of all over the place.
Yes.
Attention to details, something that's important to you.
Yes.
Okay.
Always has been.
Always has been. Okay.
Yep. Even since I was little, I would organize and straighten things. I'll make a big mess when I create. It's so funny. I'm the neatest artist you've ever met. I will make a big mess, but then I'll clean it all up before I start my next project, because I can't handle the disorganization. I need it to let everything flow.
Gotcha.
And once I get into a state of flow, then I make a big mess.
Gotcha. I love that. Would you say when you go to make decisions, could be a decision about your career, it could be a decision in a relationship, do you feel that now I'm going to say instinctually, like your first response, do you feel like it comes more emotionally driven? Do you jump more into action? Like if you hear something, is it more like, how do I feel? What do I think? Or what am I going to do?
I'm kind of a little bit of each. And I would say my first, because I'm someone who is very introspective. So I look into like, okay, how is this going to help me How is this going to benefit me? How is it going to benefit whoever I'm working with, or how's it going to benefit or affect my husband?
Okay.
So I definitely think, but I'm a doer too. So when I see something that needs to be fixed or corrected, I am like there. I am on it. And I am like, I've been told, when I was an advocate for education for most of my career and would lobby on Capitol Hill, lobby at the state Senate, those types of things. And I was very active at in this teachers union. And I actually was told one day, I met someone I had never met, and they met me in person, and they said, "Oh, I know who you are." And I was like, "You do?" And they were like, "Yeah, you're the girl who gets it done." And I was like, "Oh." So that's that, because I take action. Like, I do reflect on feelings and emotions. I do consider how it affects others. But then I'm like, okay, something needs to be done. Like, I can't just sit idle. I have to think the pros and cons. I make my lists, pros and
Hmm.
cons, and then what am I going to do and how am I going to address this issue or this opportunity? Because sometimes, you get these opportunities and it's the same thing. You have to balance because you can't do it all.
I love it. Okay. Well, I think you've typed yourself, but because again, it's far be it from somebody else to type somebody. Although, as a certified Enneagram coach, I've studied for years all the different Enneagram types and the nuances. And I think I figured out or can confirm what your type is.
Oh,
Okay.
all right.
So, do you want me to tell you?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So, and I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you what it is, and I'm going to tell you how I got there so that you
Okay.
can continue to do further like research and reading and learning and listening about to see if I'm correct. So,
Okay.
based on everything that you said, it does seem to me that you are an Enneagram 7, which is known as the enthusiast. They are,
Okay.
and I'll give a little bit more of detail about the sevens. They are they are creative. They are somebody who on the spectrum of like a glass half full to a glass half empty, they are definitely the glass half full type people. So they
Hmm.
usually can put a positive spin on things and are a little bit more optimistic on certain things. They are in the thinking triad, meaning that they are dominant first in thinking, and then they move to doing, which would lend itself to what you said to me.
Yeah.
The advocacy part is very interesting. And this is, I think, what kind of sealed it. And this is why understanding the Enneagram as a whole is really helpful, is the numbers on either side of you, right? So if you're picturing, I'm trying to create a visual for our listeners out there. So if you picture the hands on a clock and but there are 9 instead of 12, right? So you picture your hands on the clock, the numbers, that's how the Enneagram numbers are kind of around.
Okay.
And the numbers on either side of your number, the bookend you. So in your case, as a 7, it would be the 6 on one side, the 8 on the other.
Okay.
Those are known as your wings. And the wings have their own unique characteristics. And there's different schools of thought of how the wings show up. And for some people, like, because it is very different, some people kind of lean heavier to one wing than another. Some people are a little bit more balanced. And sometimes as we go through life and go through experiences and, new seasons, we start to use those, lean on those characteristics of those wings. Well, the 8 is known as they're all about justice. I'm an 8. And so we are advocates by nature. That
Yep.
is, we are champions of the underdog. And so what you're saying, and we are doers. So
Yeah.
eights and sevens are kind of right on that line, right? So where sevens are more thinking dominant and then go to doing,
Yep.
are doing dominant and then go to thinking. So they're very like butted up against each other. And so the fact that you feel like you kind of toggle between the two would
Mhm.
make a lot of sense, that you would do that. And the fact that I would probably say your 8 wing is a little bit more dominant is probably because you have a heart and a passion for that advocacy and the lobbying that like kind of tracks.
Oh yeah, that makes sense because I totally like advocacy was my passion, and even though I was teaching full time, I was going to meetings every night. I would go to school board hearings and board of supervisor hearings and speak and testify. And I was all like, my kids were my family, like they were my own kids, even though I had never had any kids of my own. I taught over 15,000 children. So I
Wow.
saw the backgrounds and the stories and the needs they had and the things that they weren't getting because people who make decisions often are not in the classroom. And so I felt I needed to make sure that their voice was heard, that
Mm,
what they needed was understood by people who were making the decisions.
I love that. And as a seven, do you find that you enjoy and get energy from like trying new things?
Oh yeah.
And
I'm a
yes.
learner and I like that's how I got into the social media role is like I've always been interested in it and I was like, okay, I retired. I have health issues, so I had to retire early. It was kind of forced. It wasn't a choice that I had decided I was going to retire early. It was something my health led me to have to do. And I was like, okay, I can't just sit and eat bonbons all day. I will go crazy. I have to learn. I have to grow. I have to even with my art, like I'm taking a course, I'm part of an art academy. I'm, getting my wings out there and, um, you know, finding places to share my art and teach classes and things like that. So this has been a year of growth. And it's funny you said the advocacy piece
Mhm.
because, when I did this the first time, I think that's what came up is I was an advocate. And I
Mhm.
had done this right as I was transitioning from teaching into retirement. And it was so like, this doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't make sense because like now I have to think about my health. My health is my priority and what brings me joy, what brings me alive, what is going to keep my health in a place of stability. And that's when, I was like, I don't know if this is right.
Well, and that happens to a lot of people. And I'm glad that you question it because sometimes people will just take a test and go in blindly. And there are so many nuances about where we are in our lives, how we show up, how we answer the questions, what our mood is like that day. You could be in a really great headspace or a really crappy headspace, and it may change how you answer questions, which is why I think there's so much more. And I'm not anti test. I just say, don't use that as a gospel and do your own investigating. And if it doesn't sit right with you, in your gut or in your head or in your mind or your heart, know that, you know what, maybe I need to keep investigating. A couple other things about the sevens, just to let you know, and this also happens to be true for the eights, is we're very future oriented people. So there's a lot of like dopamine hits that come from the planning of like what's to come. So
Yeah.
sevens love, they get energy from like the idea of, and I think probably to your art, you probably get so excited about working on a piece, commissioning a piece, doing it, planning what that's going to be. And that creative outlet really can show up there, but using it in a way that you're being very systematic in going through it, which would lend itself there for the sevens.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Oh my gosh.
Okay. All right. So now that we have that out of the way,
Yes.
my homework to you or my challenge is read up on the sevens, look at the other connection points because there's tons of other connection points with other types, how we show up when in periods of stress, when we're feeling really secure. And then you can just look at, oh yeah, I might pick up a little bit of this trait. I might pick up out of that trait. But the question where you asked, I think, is it doesn't, your Enneagram, your core Enneagram type doesn't change. If you're a seven, you are a seven through and through, right? And you can lean into those other parts of your personality, but at your core, your true motivation would be an Enneagram seven. So you're not like, I used to be a seven and now I'm a nine. That doesn't work. So
Okay.
you just, but again, if there's things about those personality types that you're like, I really like that part, you can now become more intentional about saying, how do I work that in? And what I
Mm.
usually tell people is, because a lot of times people crave what they don't have, right? So for somebody that is a little bit more timid and is a little bit more reluctant to take action, the hard part is leaning into that. leaning into that part that is a little bit, less developed for them. And so for 7, it might be showing your vulnerability. It might be expressing. Now you express your art. To me, that's a very like feeling thing, but having that true authenticity in your own emotions might be something that you need to sit in a little bit. Um, and so I think just looking at where you feel like your kind of your own pain points are, like that,
Mhm.
and say, how can I use this knowledge now that I have this tool in my toolbox, and say, where can I use this as an opportunity to grow in all aspects of my life, professionally, relationally, and, you know, and just be the best version of myself out there.
Absolutely. I
Um,
agree.
Okay. So the last part of your question that I want to address is, how can the Enneagram help me build my business and thrive as a professional artist?
Yes.
So I'm going to start with the like, I don't want to say bad with the good kind of thing, but sevens have a tendency, and I'm stereotyping here, so don't hate me, sevens out there, but sevens oftentimes they will want to get so excited about starting new things that they'll start things and then they'll start something else. Then they'll start something and then they'll start something else. And so I think when you find something that you really like and that you're good at and it's your lane, like there's going to be parts of it that are good and parts of it that are not great, and to kind of weather through that. I oftentimes see sevens get overwhelmed and struggle with what I call calendar clutter, because there's like so many different things that they're doing. And
Yep.
in business, especially entrepreneurship, there are a lot of peaks and valleys. And there's a lot of like sometimes the not fun parts of our business, right? Whether that means, oh, I have to lean into like sending invoices, or I need to do business development, or I need to, and those are the like, it's like adulting when you don't want to be an adult, right? And so I think the challenge for you as you're growing this business and you're in this next season of your life and you have a little bit more autonomy than you did when you were a teacher, and you had that outer accountability of, I need to show up at a certain time, I need to leave at a certain time, I have rubrics and benchmarks that I have to hit because I'm, working for somebody else. As you're working for yourself, you have to kind of create those boundaries for yourself. And as a 7, it's going to be your natural inclination to kind of push against those boundaries. And so just to kind of, whether that means getting an accountability partner in the areas, if you start to feel like, oh, I'm procrastinating on doing something because I don't like it and I'd rather be doing something more fun part of the business, or just aligning yourself with other people who are doing similar things so that you can continue to feed energy off of each other.
Absolutely. That's why I joined the academy.
Mm,
I'm a member of it's called oh my gosh, Art to Life Academy. Nicholas Wilton is an artist in California who started this, and it has been wonderful for that accountability piece
I
because we
love
go
that.
into the studio. There's a Zoom available for us to go into the studio and actually um, create art together. Like we sit and we work in our own studios, and there's people from all over the world in there, and it helps me so much because like you said, I want to do it all. Like I try to I overbook myself. I always have. And I've had to learn to okay, here's what I'm doing this morning. And then in the afternoon, I'm doing these things. And then I'm creating my art. Or, I'll work in the morning and then at noon I'll stop and I'll go down and just do whatever I need to do for my business. Because that's what's important to me. But it is hard. It's funny because you were saying that they tend to, they start things. I always finish them. I always finish whatever I start because my mom and dad otherwise would have my hide from heaven. They would come down and haunt me. They're like, you committed to that because that was one thing that we were taught growing up. You start something, you finish it. But the
Same.
problem is I stress myself out because I take on so many things that
Mm-hmm.
then I finish them all and I finish them well because I'm a perfectionist, but I'm stressed the whole entire time and I can't enjoy it as much. So I've really worked in the last year to make that weakness something that's not as big of an issue.
I love that. I love that. I think that's so great. I really appreciate you sharing, because I know there's people out there that can relate to that sentiment exactly. And so, um, yeah, I think I hope that this was helpful for you. I hope
Yes.
that this like gave you some direction, some insight. And what I tell people all the time about the Enneagram is it's really a tool. In my opinion, I believe it to just be another tool in your toolbox to know a little bit more about you, about how you communicate, what your communication style is.
Mhm.
Sevens are not afraid to speak their mind. They are in what is called that aggressive stance along with our threes and eights. So you're in good company with me. And that means that again, you know what you want, you know what you believe in, you have that eight wing, so it's great. And I think the biggest struggle for sevens is being able to just sit in the ordinary.
Yeah.
Sevens don't like, and especially on top of that, you're a creative artist, so you probably see life in texture. And so then to have to balance that vibrancy with household chores and the backside of running a business
Yeah.
is, like how to find that happy medium is might be a little bit of a struggle. But now that you know this about yourself, you can also have a little bit of grace. If you're like, why am I struggling with this? Why is this so hard? Well, now you know. And I
Yeah.
always tell people it's not an excuse, but it gives you context, right? It gives you
Yeah.
context and it gives you language so that you can communicate with the people in your world and say, this is why I'm thriving at this, and this is why I'm struggling, and I need to work on these few areas. And now you can, lean into that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Awesome.
It's one of those things we're always evolving and growing, or at least we should be. And I think having tools like the Enneagram and I can't remember the other one that we used to do in school all the time and in the union when we would go to staff development, but just having those guide you in knowing your strengths and weaknesses so that you can bring yourself up. I mean, that's what education is all about, really, right? Is learning where are you really strong and how can those strengths bring up your weaknesses and grow in a way that is fun and exciting, but doesn't damper your spirit because, we have to be in the business, I think, of lifting each other up. And I think that starts with understanding and knowing your own strengths and seeing it in others as well.
I couldn't have said that better myself. I couldn't have said it better. So, on that note, Precious, why don't you tell everybody if they are interested in like looking at your art? Because I know I am. And they want to, because you commission pieces, you have stuff on your website, not all of it, but some of it. Um, why don't you just go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you?
Sure. I am on Instagram. Don't post every day like you're supposed to. But I do post on some stuff on there, and that's at Treehouse Studio VA for Virginia. So Treehouse Studio VA. And then my website is my first and last name, preciousburger.com. That's all it is. Plain and simple.
And we will link up to that in our show notes. And
Oh,
for
great.
anybody else listening out there, I'm going to give you guys two different specific options if you're interested. First of all, if you have a question like Precious did, please feel free to write in. We have a questionnaire right on our website, and we'll also drop that link in the show notes. We would love to answer your question, showcase you on our show if that's something that you're interested in. We love having these conversations. And then my other the other thing I want to mention is we do have our Enneagram and Clutter masterclass. It's a pre-recorded series that I did. And it really goes through each of the different 9 Enneagram types, and there's a companion workbook that goes with it. So if this is something that you're interested in learning a little bit more about for yourself, kind of how you show up in the world, we look at it through the lens of organization and clutter. And so it's not just a general Enneagram course, but it's a Enneagram and clutter framework. So we'll link to that also in the show notes. If this conversation has kind of got your wheels turning and you want to learn a little bit more about that, that would be the best place for you to start. But Precious, thank you so much for coming on our show, being part of our Ask an Expert community. And for those of you out there, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back next week again. And I'm Lori.